On the line with us is, damn, I'm losing paper here, left, right, and center. On the line with us is Thomas Schantz, Thomas A. Schantz. He is the president of Citizens Against Government Waste, CAGW, and its lobbying affiliate, the Council for Citizens Against Government Waste. This is a conservative organization, CAGW, ccagw.org is the website. You can tweet him at Thomas, or Tom, T-O-M, Schatz, S-C-H-A-T-Z, C-A-G-W. Tom, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be on.
Glad to have you. I got an email from you that was part of a fundraiser that says, I have a shocking fact for you. Every American household, including yours, is paying a hidden tax that amounts to nearly $15,000 annually, which, of course, is more than most Americans pay in taxes. According to our friends at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, another conservative think tank, the cost of complying with federal regulations hit $1.9 trillion, or nearly $15,000 per household last year. That's more than the federal government collected in individual and corporate income taxes combined. It seems to me like there's a huge logical fallacy here, Tom. You are asserting that because there's an expense to something, that somehow that is an expense to all American citizens. For example, I start a corporation, I have to pay an incorporation fee. Should we start calling that a tax for everybody? I have to, because the U.S. tax law doesn't do what, for example, most Northern European countries do, which is they actually calculate your taxes for you. In most of these countries, you don't have the equivalent of H&R Block. You don't have this multi-billion-dollar industry of tax preparers. And we do that because the tax preparers lobby our Congress to keep that in place. So, but I wouldn't call that a tax on everybody. I mean, it's just wrong. But you're going after regulations here that, by and large, are protecting Americans from greed, from the excesses of capitalism, and frankly, protecting capitalists from the excesses of capitalism. I don't think that there's anybody in business who doesn't want regulation that prevents other businesses from playing unfairly on the playing field of business. I don't get what you're ranting about here.
Well, first of all, the size of the federal regulations are so huge you can't possibly follow all of them and comply with all of them. You've got overlapping federal, state, local regulations, making it very difficult for businesses to even go into business.
Then why are businesses,
especially smaller businesses.
why are businesses enjoying more prosperity right now, higher profits, lower taxes than they have in, certainly in my entire lifetime?
Well, they're doing it in spite of all the obstacles to get into business.
I would say they're doing it because of it.
Well,
Monsanto lobbied for GMO regulations, for example.
There are a lot of people that try to get into business, find themselves, filling out forms, blocking their access. Look, I've tried to start small businesses here in Washington, D.C. It's extremely difficult.
I started a small business in Washington, D.C. two years ago. I called LegalZoom. They did it for me for $400. It took one day.
The kinds of regulations that they're talking about here are regulations that simply add to the cost of doing business and also increase cost to people that get involved in those businesses.
Well, of course they do.
So when you say things are less expensive, we've got lower taxes, they could be even less expensive than they are now and more available if these regulations
here's my concern,
not so
Tom.
large. But all they're talking about is the cost of the regulations.
Here's my concern, Tom.
And that people don't understand how regulations affect them and how they affect their ability to do business.
I'm a businessman, Tom. I have been running businesses, including multiple multi-million-dollar companies, for 45 years. And I've been complying with regulations all that time. I ran a tea company. We were heavily regulated. I've run 2 ad agencies. We were lightly regulated. I ran a travel agency. I owned all these businesses, owned them and sold them. I owned a travel agency. When we sold it, we were doing $6 million a year in business. And, we were heavily regulated. I welcomed those regulations. They helped us define exactly how we do business. The business I have now is this radio show. My concern is that by talking about regulation in general, which is what many of the organizations that are funded by people like the Koch brothers or companies like ExxonMobil, what they really are saying is, You know, let's have an attack broadly on regulation, because regulation makes Coke industries less profitable. They'd really prefer, I don't want to pick specifically on Coke industries, let's say the fossil fuel industry in general. You know, for example, there was a regulation that said that coal mines cannot dump their waste in rivers because it poisons people to get their water from rivers downstream, kills wildlife, renders the river, you know, ruins the ecosystem, et cetera. That was one of the first regulations that the Trump administration overturned. So now you've got people downriver, all through the coal country, who are being poisoned by their water. How is that a good thing?
You can go through a lot of different regulations.
So how is that a good thing?
You can find the problem is that you don't know in most cases whether or not the rules benefits justify its costs, because a lot of the
no, this was passed in the 1990s. Newt Gingrich got legislation passed that requires a cost-benefit analysis on all regulations.
Oh, but they don't do them in many cases.
No,
they also have beyond
they're
the
required
regulations.
by law to do them.
They have what's called regulatory guidance, where they don't go through the Administrative Procedure Act. They simply add these guidances.
Then sue
existing
them.
Regulations.
Then challenge them.
Yeah, well, those are things that this Congress is trying to change, because when you
no,
have
what this Congress is trying to do is suck up to the big polluters, to the pharmaceutical companies, to the chemical companies, to the oil companies, to the coal companies. All these guys care about are the friggin' big polluters. And I'm surprised that you're in bed with these people, Tom.
Well, I think you're making a lot of assumptions about the organization. First of all, we're talking about CEI's report that identifies the number and cost of regulations. As to whether or not they're effective is a whole different story. The problem is that Congress doesn't exercise the oversight necessary to determine what the impact is of these regulations on the government. So we would like them to have the capability of reviewing what's called major regulations so that they can determine whether or not they should go into effect. Because a lot of the regulations that have been promulgated, particularly under President Obama, there was no oversight, there was no accountability, and many of these regulations go into effect without anyone understanding how they're going to work. Even when they're intended to do something good, nobody knows whether or not they're effective.
So we have already started back on the road to poisoning our rivers. I'm old enough to remember when the Cuyahoga River caught on fire, when Lake Erie was dead. And you know, doing away with regulations will take us back to that time. Is that the kind of America you want to live in?
I know. After you're talking, honestly, I'm not even familiar with the regulation you're talking about. But it's a coal mining regulation.
It's not just coal.
I'm sure there are others.
Chemicals. I mean, basically, the people who hate regulations are the big polluting industries, and the regulations that they love are the ones that give them patent protection, the ones that give them copyright protection, the ones that give them trade secret protection. I mean, there's all kinds of regulations and laws, but, largely these are regulations. The companies love, want, lobby for, beg for. The ones that they hate are the ones that say that you can't poison people. I can't think of a single regulation that I'm operating under that I think is outrageous. And like I said, I've been in business for 45 years. I don't get it.
So you're making an assumption that everything the government does is positive and good for the country?
No, what I'm saying is that when the government does something that is destructive to the country, people speak out. For example, you've got Ajit Pai right now putting in place a whole new set of regulations, right, for the Internet. He's taking the Internet out of Title II, which was arguably very regulatory, very light. It was just one, basic thing. And putting it into a whole set of very complex rules that will work to the benefit of AT&T, will work to the benefit of Verizon, that will work to the benefit of Comcast, and that will screw any little company that wants to try to start an Internet service provider. And these new regulations are loved and embraced by this administration.
All right, and what does that regulation that Tom Wheeler put into effect not cover? It doesn't cover Facebook, it doesn't cover Google, it doesn't cover Twitter.
That's because they're not Internet service providers.
Well, what role do the ISPs play that's so much more important than Google or Facebook, where there are privacy issues?
You can't visit Google or Facebook without having an Internet service provider in the middle. And now, with the death of net neutrality, my Internet service provider gets to see everything I do on Facebook and Twitter. So I've lost my privacy twice, Tom.
What happened to you between 1996 and 2015 on the Internet that you were complaining about? Because in 2015, they changed the rules to Title II. They're now back to where they were between 1996 and 2015.
Well, what I was complaining about was Comcast regularly
there?
throttling me if I tried to use a VPN so that Comcast didn't see all my traffic, for example. I mean, that was happening regularly. I transfer large video files all the time here at this show because we do this as simulcast as television. And if I'm at home and I need to get a segment and edit it or whatever, I got to pull down a 5 gigabyte or a 20 gigabyte file off the internet. And if I try and do that through a VPN, through a virtual private network, so that Comcast can't see what I'm doing, even though I'm paying for 100 MIPS a download on a business system with Comcast, they would throttle me. They'd throttle me down to 5 MIPS.
And can you do it right now?
No, they've started throttling again.
Were you able to do it in 2015 and 16?
Yes.
Well, that's the only example I've ever heard because I've never heard anybody complain about it. And by the way, if somebody has a complaint, there's a place to go.
Well, that's my point, is that, if you don't like a specific regulation, you can do something about it. Well, Thom, anyhow, it's the organization is Citizens Against Government Waste, CAGW, ccagw.org is the website. Thom Schatz, SCHATZ, is the Twitter handle. Thom, thanks for being with us today.
Sure, thank you.
Good talking with you. We'll be right back.